It was one of those nights that felt different from the very beginning. The air was thick and damp, the kind that settles in your lungs and makes you feel like you're constantly struggling for breath. The streets were quiet, almost unnervingly so, as though the city itself was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. The soft glow of streetlights barely cut through the darkness, casting long, distorted shadows across the pavement. As a man named Ethan made his way home from work, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. It wasn't that anything in particular was out of place. It was more a sense of unease that seemed to permeate the night air, something he couldn't quite put his finger on. Ethan had never been the superstitious type. He prided himself on his logical mind, his ability to rationalize away anything that seemed strange or unexplained. But tonight, something felt different. The world around him seemed to be holding its breath, as if it was on the verge of revealing something he wasn't meant to see. He told himself it was just the stress of a long day, the fatigue of working late into the evening that had his mind playing tricks on him. He tried to push the feeling aside, telling himself he was being silly. As he walked down the dimly lit street, his footsteps echoed in the silence, the only sound to break the stillness of the night. His mind wandered back to the events of the day. Nothing extraordinary, just the usual grind of office work, a few mundane meetings, and the constant hum of his thoughts. Always busy, but never truly focused. He was lost in his own mind when he first noticed her. At first, it was nothing more than a fleeting movement at the edge of his vision. He caught sight of a figure walking ahead of him, a tall woman dressed in a dark coat, her hair flowing behind her in the slight breeze. She was walking briskly, her pace quick but steady, as if she had a destination in mind. Ethan didn't think much of it at first. People walked down this street all the time, especially at this hour, though it was rare to see anyone out at this time of night. But as he continued walking, he began to feel the hairs on the back of his neck stand on end. Something about the way the woman moved unsettled him. It wasn't the usual swing of the arms, the natural flow of a person's gait. No, this was different. The movements were too precise, too deliberate. Each step she took seemed to mirror his own, as though she were walking in perfect sync with him. Ethan slowed down for a moment, trying to shake off the feeling, but the sensation only intensified. Every step he took, every shift in his posture, seemed to be reflected by the woman ahead of him. He stopped for a moment, watching her. She didn't look back, didn't falter in her stride. Her steps were unwavering, just like his. The street was so empty, and the distance between them was so small. Ethan tried to dismiss it as a coincidence, telling himself that it was just his tired mind playing tricks on him. But the longer he watched, the more it seemed like something was wrong. He picked up his pace, quickening his steps, hoping to put some distance between himself and the strange figure. But when he did, she did too. It was subtle at first, a slight increase in her speed, barely noticeable. But then it became more apparent. The woman was matching his pace, step for step, stride for stride. He couldn't explain it. He wasn't even sure why it bothered him so much. Maybe it was the fact that she was keeping such perfect time with him, or maybe it was the unsettling feeling that he wasn't in control of the situation. Either way, Ethan felt his heart rate increase, his breath becoming shallow as he tried to shake the growing sense of dread that began to cloud his mind. Faster now, he increased his speed, walking more quickly to outpace her. The street seemed to stretch on endlessly, and his footsteps echoed louder in his ears. But no matter how fast he went, she was always there, always a few steps ahead. The thought that maybe she was just someone walking at the same pace, maybe just another tired soul on the same lonely road, flickered through his mind. But the more he thought about it, the more the feeling of familiarity gnawed at him. It wasn't just that she was matching his movements, it was that she was moving exactly like him. Every shift in posture, every step he took was mirrored by her. It was like watching a reflection in a darkened window, a mirror image that had somehow slipped into the real world. Ethan turned a corner, hoping to lose her in the maze of alleys and side streets. But as he rounded the bend, the figure was still there, just ahead of him. She hadn't slowed down, hadn't faltered. She was still walking at the same brisk pace, still matching his every movement, as though she were his shadow. The air around him grew colder, a chill creeping up his spine as he realized that no matter how fast he moved, he couldn't shake her. He was being followed, but it wasn't like any pursuit he had ever experienced. It wasn't the chase of a person trying to catch up with him. It was like something else entirely, like he was being watched from a distance, studied and mirrored by something that shouldn't exist. A sense of panic began to rise within him, his thoughts scattering as he tried to make sense of what was happening. Was it a trick of the light? Was he losing his mind? But the more he tried to reason with himself, the more the feeling of wrongness grew. He glanced over his shoulder, but the streets behind him were empty. Nothing but shadows stretching in the distance, swallowed by the darkness. It was only her, only the woman ahead of him, matching his every step. His pulse quickened and his breath caught in his throat. He reached a wide intersection, the road splitting in different directions. There was a bench on the corner, and he sat down, trying to calm himself, trying to regain control. The streetlights flickered above, casting long, eerie shadows across the sidewalk. He closed his eyes for a moment, steadying his breath. When he opened them again, she was still there, walking ahead of him. The woman was moving in perfect synchronization with him, her steps exact, her movements unnervingly precise. At this point, Ethan knew he had to confront it. He wasn't going to outpace her. He wasn't going to lose her. This was something else, something he couldn't explain. And so, with growing dread and a pounding heart, he stood up and started walking toward her. His legs felt heavy, his feet dragging on the pavement. Each step he took felt like a burden, but still, he pressed on, his eyes locked on the figure ahead. As he got closer, the details of her appearance became clearer. She was tall, her face obscured by the long, dark hair that hung loosely around her shoulders. Her coat, black and flowing, billowed in the slight breeze, her movements still unnervingly precise. The closer he got, the more he realized how identical her form was to his own. He was no longer just following her. He was walking towards something that was both familiar and alien. His own movements, his own posture, reflected back at him in the form of this woman. He was close now, just a few feet away, and as he stepped forward, his heart raced in his chest. He could feel the cold sweat gathering at the back of his neck, the sudden realization dawning upon him that he wasn't just seeing something, he was part of it. And then, as he reached the woman, his heart stopped. She turned to face him, and in that moment, Ethan saw the truth. The face staring back at him was his own. There was no mistaking it. The exact same eyes, the same jawline, the same expression of shock and disbelief. It was his reflection staring back at him from the darkness. But it wasn't him. It was her. Frozen in place, Ethan felt the world shift beneath his feet. The realization hit him like a cold wave. He wasn't being followed. He wasn't being watched. This wasn't a mirror image. He wasn't just seeing himself. He was seeing something else entirely. Something that had taken his place. Something that had walked beside him, matching his every move, waiting for the moment to reveal itself. And in that moment, Ethan realized the truth with horrifying clarity. It wasn't him who had been walking down the street. It wasn't him at all. Ethan stumbled backward, his legs suddenly weak beneath him. His breath caught in his throat as his heart thudded painfully in his chest. The woman, no, the thing standing before him, with his own face, smiled, an unsettling grin that stretched too wide, too knowing. His mind raced, the horror of the realization creeping into his thoughts like a cold fog. The figure before him was no longer just a reflection. It was something else entirely, something that had taken on his form, his identity. He couldn't look away from the face that mirrored his own, but it wasn't his face at all. There was something wrong about it, something subtly sinister. The eyes, his eyes, were empty, voids that seemed to pull at him, sucking in the light around them, dark pools that mirrored his every thought and fear. The grin that spread across the woman's face seemed almost too wide, stretching unnaturally, as if it was too large for the face it was on. Her smile was wrong. It didn't belong. Ethan's hand trembled as he reached out toward her, but the moment he moved, she did the same. His fingers twitched, and hers did as well. It was like watching a reflection in a cracked mirror, each movement warped, each step distorted. And yet, no matter what he did, she always mimicked him. No matter how much he tried to separate himself from this nightmare, it pulled him deeper. He wanted to scream, but his voice caught in his throat, the sound of his own heartbeat pounding in his ears louder than anything else. The air around them felt thick, suffocating. The streetlights flickered overhead, casting their long shadows across the pavement. Ethan took a step back, his feet unsteady, but the figure did the same. He took another step, and she followed. It was as though she was controlling him, pulling him into a twisted dance that he couldn't escape. His hands were shaking now, sweat beading on his forehead as he turned to look around. The street was still empty. The city was silent, the world around him an eerie frozen tableau, and he was trapped in this moment with the creature who looked like him. Ethan's mind raced, trying to find some explanation for what was happening. Was it a dream? A hallucination? Some cruel trick his mind was playing on him? But even as the thoughts swirled in his head, he knew that none of them made sense. This wasn't a dream. This wasn't a trick. This was real, and whatever it was, it had trapped him in this endless cycle of mimicry. His legs moved on their own now, stepping back toward the darkened alley where he had first seen her, and with each step, the woman followed. Her pace was slower now, more deliberate, but still perfect. She matched him with an eerie precision, and the further he walked, the more his own movements became mechanical, as though they were being controlled by some invisible force. The panic that had begun to rise in his chest slowly turned to dread as he realized he couldn't escape. Every time he tried to speed up, she did too. Every time he slowed down, she mirrored him. There was no way out. There was no way to break free. It wasn't just that she was copying him. It was that she was connected to him in some unexplainable way, as if they were bound together by some invisible tether, a thread that tightened with every movement. It was as if he were tethered to this thing, this reflection of himself, and no matter where he went, no matter how fast he ran, it would always be there, a shadow at his heels. He thought of turning around again, of confronting it head on, but the terror was too much. The thought of facing himself, truly facing the thing that wore his face, was unbearable. His chest tightened with each breath he took, and his legs moved faster, not from his own will, but from the compulsion that seemed to have taken over his body. The streets twisted in front of him, his mind fogging over with panic and confusion. The world seemed to bend, like he was walking through a distorted version of reality, where nothing was quite right, where nothing felt like it should. The streetlights above him blinked in and out of existence, as if they too were trapped in some maddening loop, unable to escape. His thoughts became more scattered, more desperate. What was this thing? What did it want from him? It had his face, his form. Why? Why was it following him? Why was it always just a step behind? Why had it waited until now, until this exact moment, to reveal itself? The woman, the thing, continued to move in perfect synchronization with him, her movements fluid, too perfect, too precise. There was no hesitation in her steps, no error in the way she moved. Every time he glanced back, he saw her, a mirror of himself, staring at him with those empty, hollow eyes. It was like looking at a ghost of himself, a dark, twisted version of the man he thought he was. And each time he looked away, the dread deepened. He could no longer tell where the city ended and the nightmare began. The streets were all the same now, endless, looping, twisting in on themselves, like a maze from which there was no escape. The alleyways grew darker, the shadows longer, and no matter where he turned, the reflection of his own face followed. The quiet of the night pressed in on him, thick and suffocating. The weight of it crushed him, suffocating him from all sides. Ethan tried to call out, but the sound of his voice was drowned out by the pounding in his head, the cacophony of his heartbeat that reverberated in his skull. He didn't know where he was anymore, didn't know which direction he was headed. His thoughts spiraled, and the world around him blurred into a dizzying whirl of shadows and light. All he could focus on was the reflection. All he could see was her. No, it, matching his every movement. Every time he tried to escape, it kept him locked in this horrifying dance. Then, in a moment of fleeting clarity, a horrible thought surfaced in his mind. What if he had always been the one following her? What if it was never him who was being stalked, but her who had been watching him all along? What if he was the one who had been mirrored, the one who had been replaced? The thought hit him like a wave, crashing over him with a chilling force. He stopped suddenly, his legs shaking violently beneath him. The woman, the thing, halted too. It was as though they were one, their movements completely synchronized. Ethan's breathing was ragged, his chest heaving as the realization swept over him. He couldn't be sure anymore. He couldn't be sure who was who. His head spun, and for a moment, the world around him seemed to distort further, bending and twisting, until he was no longer sure where the real world ended and the nightmare began. He was trapped. He had been trapped this entire time. The thing before him was no longer just a reflection. It was part of him, just as he was part of it. The figure took another step toward him, and without thinking, without even realizing it, Ethan stepped forward as well. It was as if the very act of moving was no longer his decision. His feet were moving without his consent, dragging him closer and closer to the thing that wore his face. With every step, he could feel himself sinking deeper into something dark, something he didn't understand. His pulse quickened, his heart racing, and for the first time in what felt like an eternity, he felt a wave of terror so pure and so intense that it threatened to consume him entirely. He was being drawn toward it, toward himself, as though the lines between them were blurring, as though they were one and the same. He reached out his hand instinctively, and the figure mirrored him again. They were no longer separate. They were the same. And in that moment, in that single horrifying second, Ethan realized something that chilled him to his core. He had never been himself at all. The woman was not the one following him. He had been following her. Ethan's body trembled violently as he stood there, frozen in place, staring into the abyss of the woman's, his, eyes. The world around him began to warp, as if reality itself were buckling under the weight of the revelation. He couldn't move, couldn't speak, his legs paralyzed as the figure before him seemed to grow taller, more imposing, until she was the only thing in his world. Everything he had once believed, his identity, his life, felt like a fragile illusion. His very sense of self began to crack and shatter, as if he were made of glass, and someone had struck him with a hammer, each fragment scattering in the wind. The air around him grew colder, the darkness pressing in like a suffocating shroud. And all at once, he understood. It was never about the mirror image. It was never about being followed or being the one who did the following. It was about the fact that he had been walking in her footsteps the entire time, as though his life had been a mere echo of something that came before, the shadow of a person he had once been, and the entity before him, the thing that shared his face, was not merely an imitation. It was his origin, his truth. A cold realization settled in his stomach, a sickening knot that twisted tighter the more he thought about it. For the first time in his life, Ethan felt utterly, irrevocably lost. And then, as if the universe itself had heard his despair, something strange happened. The figure before him, this version of himself, this twisted reflection, began to shift. It wasn't a simple movement, no. It was as though the air around her bent, rippled, and then, like water parting for a submerged object, her form morphed, folding inward, becoming something different. Her face, his face, distorted in a grotesque swirl of shapes, the once familiar features warping into something darker, more sinister. The grin that had been so unsettling earlier stretched too far, splitting her face like an unholy rift. The skin began to flake off in patches, revealing something beneath, a shifting mass of shadows, an amorphous entity that pulsed and writhed in a way that was not human. Ethan gasped, stumbling backward as his pulse spiked. It was then that the world around him began to crack. The ground beneath his feet split open with a low, thunderous rumble, and the city, the street, the very fabric of his reality seemed to disintegrate. The buildings around him flickered like faulty lights, their outlines hazy and incomplete, as though they were on the verge of collapsing into the void. The streetlights blinked in and out of existence, their orange glow flickering like dying embers in a cold wind. He looked down, and in the crevice forming beneath him, he saw it, a vast, endless chasm stretching into nothingness. The darkness within the void was like a living thing, pulling him in, inviting him to fall, to join the creature that had once been him. His heart raced in his chest, and his body trembled as the voice of his own thoughts, his own fear, screamed at him to escape. But no matter where he moved, the creature, his reflection, remained with him. It was not just an echo anymore. It had become the center of this collapsing reality, the force that bound everything together. Ethan could feel himself drawn toward it, like a magnet to its center, as if his very existence were tied to this twisted creature, this distortion of self. The chasm beneath him pulsed with an eerie rhythm, each beat reverberating through the air, through his bones, through his very soul. The figure was no longer just a reflection. It was the source. It was the beginning and the end. It was the shadow that had always been lurking just out of sight, waiting for this moment, waiting for the fracture to happen, for the world to break apart. "Don't," Ethan whispered, his voice barely a breath. His throat felt dry, cracked, as if he hadn't spoken in years. He didn't know if the words were meant for himself or for the thing before him. Maybe they were a plea. Maybe they were a warning. But it didn't matter. It was already too late. The creature, the reflection, stared back at him, and for a moment, he thought he saw something. Something like pity, or maybe recognition, flicker in its eyes. The smile, too, seemed to soften, as if it knew what was coming, as if it had always known. Ethan's knees buckled, and he collapsed to the ground, his mind spiraling, his thoughts slipping through his fingers like sand. And then, the voice came. It was a whisper at first, soft and distant, like the wind brushing past his ear. It was his voice, or at least, it sounded like his voice. But it was not him. It was the thing that had taken his place. It was the truth of everything, the truth that Ethan had tried so hard to ignore, to run from. "You were never meant to exist," the voice said, its tone cold, hollow. "You were never meant to be." Ethan's breath caught in his throat as the words sank in, each syllable a dagger, a searing burn in his chest. He tried to scream, but his voice was gone, swallowed by the void that surrounded him. The creature took a step forward, its form shifting and writhing, its face still his own, but distorted and twisted beyond recognition. "Everything you are," it continued, "is a reflection of what was, a shadow of something lost. You were never the one who walked. You were always the one who followed." The ground beneath him trembled, the chasm widening, pulling him toward its depths. Ethan could feel the darkness seeping into his soul, spreading like a poison, erasing everything he had ever known. The creature's smile grew wider, and its hands, his hands, reached out, as if beckoning him to join it. And then, just as Ethan felt himself slipping into the void, the world around him collapsed completely. The streets were gone. The buildings were gone. The night was gone. There was only the infinite blackness stretching in all directions, an endless expanse of nothingness. His body floated weightlessly, his mind a blur of confusion, until he could no longer tell where he ended and the darkness began. The creature, the reflection, was there too, but now it was something else entirely. It was no longer a form, no longer a figure. It was the very essence of the void itself, the thing that had been waiting for him all along. And as Ethan's mind slipped away into the darkness, he heard one final whisper, one last breath of air that seemed to echo in the void. "Welcome home."